how about a nice warm round of applause for my very brave wife, Alicia Dix.
Thank you, honey. The partnership that we have with Voices of Hope is truly one of my favorite things since starting Speak Up. It's one of the best things for me that's come out of that. I feel supremely passionately about the importance of these stories being told and being kept alive, and about the unique and essential perspective of the second generation. Knowing how the ripples and the horrors of the Holocaust continue to reverberate is so vital to understanding the complexity and lasting effects of what happened. Through doing these workshops and working with people and hearing their stories, I feel like when you try to, if someone says, tell us about the Holocaust, it is like staring into the sun, that it's too big to describe, to explain, but by hearing the people whose parents went through this and their experience, having grown up with those parents, breaks it down. And I think it's so important to relate to that, to continue to have these stories on such a personal level. This amazing group of people have truly been a pleasure to work with. They've worked really, really hard, and they've been really fun, and I'm excited for them to shine in front of you today. All right, we have one more story this afternoon, and it is George Bacall. After 40 years in private practice, George is a recently retired OBGYN who now teaches students and residents in the art and practice of medicine. He and his wife Nancy have 4 children and 8 grandchildren. He tells me that his favorite hobby is tennis, and that his first date with Nancy was on the tennis court, where he says she could have whipped him, but didn't because she didn't want to hurt his ego. George and Nancy extend their tennis season every year by spending winters in Florida. George's favorite famous Jewish hero is Albert Einstein. George says, everyone knows he was a genius, the founder of modern physics, etc., but he also witnessed and escaped Nazi persecution, just like my family. Plus, it turns out they have another connection. They're both graduates of the University of Zurich, though not in the same class, 70 years apart. Please welcome George Bacall.
I'm good.
You good with it?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I was in the operating room at St. Francis Hospital and Medical Center, holding my dad's left hand and looking as if for the first time at the tattoo on his left arm. The tattoo he got from Auschwitz. 129494, with a little inverted triangle right under the numbers. The doctor began with a small incision in Dad's right groin. He isolated the blood vessels and took a catheter and placed it in one of those vessels and snaked it up Dad's abdomen, through his chest, and into his heart. He then injected the dye, and suddenly, Dad's heart stopped beating. There I was holding his hand, the hand of the man who was the consummate provider. Before he was the father of 3 children, he took care of my mom and their families during the Holocaust. They were married in the Warsaw Ghetto. And it was there that he made the promise that he would take care of her. And that's exactly what he did. In the ghetto, he would regularly sneak out and sell watches and such to the locals, to the Germans. He got away with it because he spoke German fluently and was blonde and blue-eyed, and they didn't suspect anything. And he would bring back whatever food he could find to nourish his family. On the eve of Yom Kippur, Mom asked Dad to go and try to find something for them to eat for the meal preceding the fast of Yom Kippur. How ironic, a fast for people who are starving to death. But that's what they did. They kept their faith. So Dad went out and came back with a horse's leg and gave it to Mom to prepare for the meal. When I was a first-year OBGYN resident, Dad was starting to have some problems, and he would call me and complain about these problems. He would say, "Judgy," he'd call me Judgy. "Judgy, I have pain in my shoulder. When I walk, it hurts. The doctor gave me some pills. Gut nicht helfen. Nothing's working here." So after a few calls like that, I said, "Dad, we got to bring you up here." So I brought him up to Hartford and had him evaluated by the physicians who I trusted and had great confidence in. And so after their evaluation, they decided he needed that coronary angiogram. So a few days before that procedure, Dad turned to me and said, "Judgy, I'm really scared. I'm very scared of this procedure. I think I might die. Could you be with me during the procedure?" So this was my hero, the guy who did everything to save his family, the guy who took care of us. And now it was my turn to comfort and take care of him. Sorry. So people who have had near-death experiences often say that they've seen their lives flash before their eyes. And there I was holding my dad's hand when his heart stopped beating. And suddenly I was getting the flashbacks, not the flashbacks of my life, but of the flashbacks of my parents' lives during the Holocaust. How in the ghetto, their street was blocked off by the SS on the eve of Yom Kippur. They never got to eat that horse, by the way. They were dragged out of their homes, and they were taken and herded like cattle into the cattle cars of a train that was going to transport them to Treblinka and certain death. But Dad was a very smart and resourceful man, so he had a metal file that he hid in his coat, in the lining of his coat, and he took that out when they were on that train. And as soon as the train started moving, he was filing away at the bar across this rectangular window in the cattle car. And when he got through that, they drew straws. And the man with the short straw said, "Oh, I can't do this. I can't jump out of the window." So Dad said, "I'll do it." And he climbed out of the window into the night in the speeding train. He's holding on to the rungs along the side of the cattle car. And then another man comes up to the window and starts to come out, and Dad pushes him back. He says, "No, my wife first." And so Mom gets out of the window, and Dad grabs her, holds her by the waist, makes sure she has her foot on the rung, she has good footing, and he's talking to her, and he says, "Listen, we have to jump into the direction the train is going, and we have to land on our feet and roll." And at his signal, that's what they did. They jumped off the train in the middle of the night, hit the ground, and rolled and rolled. And miraculously, they were uninjured. They had a few bruises, but that was it. And so then they spent that night, they found refuge in a barn for the night. And the next day, they found their way back to Warsaw. And in Warsaw, they managed to stay outside the ghetto and live for a short time as Gentiles. Shortly thereafter, the SS found out, in fact, that they were Jews, and they pursued my parents, and they ended up running back into the ghetto to escape the SS. They're in the ghetto, and for 6 months more, they're in the ghetto, and then, excuse me. 6 months later, the Warsaw Ghetto uprising erupts. And Mom and Dad and the resistance fought the Nazis for over a month. And at the end of that time, Mom and Dad were pulled out of their bunkers at gunpoint and placed in front of a brick wall alongside of other resistance fighters. Firing squad ready. And they thought, this is it. This is the end. No more. And suddenly, the commanding officer says, halt. You Schweine, du Schweine, he said, you pigs. You don't deserve to die so easily. We want you to suffer before you die. And for that, he sent them to the death camps. And they first were at Majdanek, a death camp, and 3 months later, they ended up in Auschwitz, where they got their tattoos on their left forearms. During that time in Auschwitz, Dad, again, the resourceful guy he was, made sure he volunteered for everything. So if they needed an electrician, he was an electrician. If they needed a plumber, he was a plumber. If they needed a roofer, he was a roofer. He did anything that they wanted. And he realized, that if he was useful to them, well, he might survive. And at the same time, he took care of Mom, who was in the other camp, in the women's camp. He managed to bribe a guard, and get my mom into a non-Jewish barrack, which was critical because the non-Jewish barracks, the Gentile barracks, they didn't have selections very often for the gas chambers. And Mom was, at that time, unaware of her pregnancy. And she fortunately had a Czechoslovakian midwife, prisoner, in her barrack with her. And when the time came, that midwife delivered a healthy baby boy to Mom. That baby boy would have been my older brother. But he was taken away and never seen again. And my mom kept screaming, I want my baby. Where's my baby? And the midwife said to her, you can't have your baby. If you have your baby, they will find you and you will both go to the gas chambers. And you should not allow that. You will find your husband, she said, and you will have more babies with him. They were in Auschwitz for 1.5 years. And then they were on the death marches from Auschwitz to Germany. And they ended up in separate concentration camps. 3 months later, the Allied forces came and liberated them from their concentration camps. And they spent the next 3 to 4 months looking for each other, hoping that they were alive and finding each other. And they finally found each other in Germany, where they settled, took a breath, and began to heal. The following year, I was born. And when I was 3 years old, we immigrated to New York City. Mom and Dad finally found happiness and peace in America. So all these stories were whirling through my head, holding my dad's hand as his heart stopped beating. When they applied the paddles to his chest, and I heard, all clear, and I let go of his hand. Thank you. Thank you, thank you. Well, this is quite an experience to do this. I mean, I've given lectures, and they're easy compared to this. So, I want to say, firstly, Voices of Hope. You can see the sign behind me. We're a really dedicated organization to make sure that our families' experience in the Holocaust is never forgotten. And it's a wonderful organization. Thank you for coming to support it. And last but not least, we have to thank these two people right here, Matt and Alicia. They took us through a process. You should have seen us the first night. How are we going to do this thing? And they just took us through it. Their expertise and their support was wonderful. So I thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, George. Well, I appreciate that, George. The privilege is really Matt's and mine, that working with you guys and getting to know you and being taken in and trusted with your stories is so meaningful to us. And thank you so much for sharing your stories with us and with everybody here today. Another applause for our amazing storytellers.